Hello, everyone out there in the world today. Today is February 11th, 2025. I don't know how we got here, but we're still here. Today, I want to read into the record an interesting story that's kind of been around my life as an advisor that started in Philadelphia. I was born and raised there. I haven't lived in Philly since 2004, but I have a lot of family and friends that are still back up that way. But all the things that are going on right now in the world, there's a lot of changes, very dramatic, and some of them are, there's a lots of discussion right now about the Federal Reserve, the gold standard, or we don't have one in the United States today. So I thought this would be an interesting day to talk about Stephen Girard, his bank, his amazing life, and how he bailed out the feds and kept us from not having a country in the War of 1812. So he wasn't the first American to make a fortune and then pledge his fortune to keep America as a country, but he was definitely one of the earliest ones. So I have the book I read to you before. I'm going to read from that book into the record. Uh, it is George Wilson's Yesterday's Philadelphia, and he has a couple pages of summary about Stephen Girard starting at page like 26. And I'm also going to read into the record about Stephen Girard and how he saved America despite other other famous founders from a couple other websites as well. So when I grew up, I was in the Fairmount section of Philadelphia, right a few blocks away from where Rocky Balboa ran up the steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum. And I could see that we were up on this hill and we could, look down and watch the fireworks, like, as if we were in like a skybox, at our own house. It was a great memory of mine. Stephen Gerrard's college, that is really a boarding school for orphans. uh, I think they can still go as early as kindergarten through 12th grade, and there's a number of people today that still talk about him, and there are great experiences there. I want to show you this particular book. This is one of the Girard College graduates that wrote a defining biography about Stephen Girard's amazing life. That one's called The Stone Cocoon, and the Stone Cocoon being the college that he built for originally orphan boys. So let's just start with um, a little summary here. Stephen Girard came to America by way of Philadelphia in 1776, the year of the American Revolution. What a time! What a time to show up in Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty, to steal a term that Boston likes to use. He had been to New York on earlier voyages, but it was his first arrival in Philadelphia that Girard made America his permanent home. He went on to be the wealthiest citizen in the country, and in several ways, he contributed much to the early growth of the new nation he had adopted. His influence was evident in shipping, construction, banking, and politics, later in coal mining and roads. And there's something very mysterious today. I believe I have a hypothesis that I'm working that there's some of his coal mining rights, land tracts in the state of Pennsylvania are actually owned inside of the trust that he gave as part of his estate to the city of Philadelphia that's still around today. So there's a lot of, I think, kind of hidden wealth in there. At least that's my theory I'm working on. Okay. In a more benign display of control, Girard gained great civic regard with his attention to the human tragedies that took a toll in the early years of the Republic. His generosity was exhibited in many charitable works, the most notable of which thrives today. Many decades after his death in 1831, Girard College, a school opened in his name that he funded, I mean, it wasn't just opened in his name, continues to function as he decreed it, giving opportunity to those who would otherwise not have it. Stephen Girard's legacy lives on in diverse ways, visible and invisible, public and silent, his mark indelibly inscribed on our society. And that's what I'm getting at with this. These coal rights, I think, are still owned inside of that trust. More to come on that. So, to begin with his amazing life, little Stephen, he was born in Bordeaux, France, which, the Bordeaux amazing wines that we know about, some of us know about today. That's where they're from. It was a large seaport in southwestern France. He was born May 20th, 1750, so 26 years before the American Revolution. He felt the attraction of the seas at an early age and would find his destiny in answering that call. The early business knowledge that Stephen Girard so readily acquired came after sailing the seas first as a recruit, like a little cabin boy apprentice, later as a master, gaining the wisdom that would take him far afield into profitable business ventures, other than those that resulted from his maritime successes. The United States of America did not yet exist when young Stephen boarded his first ship. However, his innate business intelligence, gathered beyond that of his peers, held that his destiny would one day make him the richest man in the country. This is a picture of him at the college at the end of his life that he founded. He grew up as the oldest in a large family of 9 children born to Pierre and Anne Girard. No formal schooling, as there was no system of public education in France until after the French Revolution. His education came from his parents and from tutors. They were aware of his growing love for life at sea and was attentive to their young son's outlining his dreams to them, dreams that would soon take him across the seas and eventually to a new home. He was a willing student, assimilated knowledge quickly, and developed a thirst for learning that served him well as he grew up to be the foremost business titan of his time. Just to pause for a minute, this is from ushistory.org. And as a young girl, I do remember my mother um, talking about him because Girard College was just also a few blocks from our home and where we lived, and there was still Girard Bank at that time. It had not been acquired. So this is so it was actually like around the bicentennial of 1976 when she was telling me these stories and explaining who he was. So that was, 200 years after he had come to America as on that ship. He was still had a bank and the school still exists in his name. Okay, so this is the part I think is really interesting and inspiring to all of us who have had tragic and difficult circumstances early in our life. Gerard's life, too, was difficult when he was young. It's not clear if he was born or it happened when he was a child, but he had no vision in his right eye. What is certain is that the eye was not only sightless, it also became a repulsive looking abnormality that brought young Gerard ridicule and later unwarranted social isolation. The cruelty of those with whom Gerard associated in business and in casual social activity as they observed his affliction with obvious distaste forced him into seclusion at times. And it brought with it a stigma that labeled him as shy and withdrawn. So there's many of us that have had that experience for being ridiculed for having some deformity or something physical that we can't change. But he turned this into a strength. I don't think he had a surgery to like remove that. Maybe he had like a growth on the eye, so it was, you know, very grotesque, right? To be looking at his face. His older pictures we'll look at later. Maybe he ended up like the eye withered or something because it just looks like a closed. He didn't have a patch on it, but it just looked like it was closed. It was his right eye. His mother died at the age of 36. The continued pregnancies and labors of childbearing, one after another, did apparently contribute to her death in April of 1762. So if he was born in 1750, he'd be 12 years old. He was the oldest of the kids. His mom's now dead. The passing of his mother had great impact on him and was likely the impetus that helped send him to sea early in 1764. And I would pause here and also say, when I'm doing all my World War II research for my books, my upcoming book about my uncle Pete, and I have there he is back here with his flag from his grave in Europe. He was killed in World War II. A lot of the men in his unit that I researched and built a index for, um, their mother died young as well, and so they kind of were, motherless, and into the army was a more natural, like there wasn't a mom stopping them, and there, was a way for them to kind of make it more manageable, I think, for the dad who was widowed back at home. So that's kind of interesting. Like that's when he goes to sea. So back to Stephen Girard. He set sail from Bordeaux and on the coast of France on the brig, which is a boat term, a ship, Pelerin, Pelerin, as a pilotin, which is an apprentice officer, Pilotin. And I think today that term pilotin, maybe that's the French term, because I don't know French at all, but is pilot is definitely a term used today in shipping and cruising. And when my husband and I were doing lots of cruising uh, for about 10 or 15 years, there was a pilot that would come onto the cruise ship, and they were an expert navigator of the local area around the port. And the ship's captain would actually turn over control of the ship's vessel to the local pilot, and they would navigate us, the big boat, into the port dock, put us out on anchor, which is called at tender. Um, so I think so you're getting all this technical knowledge. And one of the reasons today they do that is, it's very close to the bottom. There's shifting tides of sands and silt. So you could end up, lodging the vessel or injuring it, hitting rocks that you don't know are there underneath. So a very technical job. So coming back to Stephen Girard here. The learning process for him as a pilotin included many ship maneuvering nuances, normally handled only by the captain of the vessel, so similar. Girard's quick and favorable responses to the demands of ocean travel quickly became apparent. So he must have been pretty smart, especially if he only had one eye. He's already being looked at, in askance, by how well are you going to be able to see things while you're maneuvering a ship. So he must have been smart from the beginning and, quick learner able. As a result, Girard was given greater latitude in his role as pilotin. And with that vote of confidence, he was able to grasp not only the demands of handling and commanding a ship at sea, he also learned much about buying and selling cargo. So he must have been a sponge, like trying to learn everything he possibly can, instead of just like, oh, I'm going to check in and just do my job. I'm just doing my job. That was not him. He wanted to know it all. At that time, it, what the cargo he was trading was sugar and coffee. Despite a demanding schedule on board ship, Gerard read extensively. And this is, I think, where I definitely relate to Stephen's character, because as a young girl in a minister's family, like we didn't own the house, the church owned the house. You kind of served at the behest of, in our case, the Methodist Conference, like would place my dad at different churches, and that's how we spent the first 10 years of my life in Fairmount near Gerard's place. It was like he was placed there at this mission church. But the one thing we had was books, and and both of my parents were uh, big readers too. So I loved, for those of you might remember Dr. Ben Carson, the, genius brain surgeon that served as a cabinet member in Trump's first administration. He was saying the most powerful gift anyone ever gave him was a library card. And there's a reason. So if we come back to my website, I'll just show you. I still have my first library card. Um, here we go. There it is. And this is, to me, the ticket to freedom, truly, because you can form your own opinions. And even if for those of you, this is one reason why I'm reading into the records, some of you might not be able to see, you haven't see as well. Being able to listen and learn something is obviously another way to quote, read auditorially. So you can read, I have a little story here about my library card and like how important that thing was to me. And I still physically have it. That's why I put it there. I think it's like a symbol. Um, I wanted to show you this too. I don't, for my, the world's changing, right? So I created this advisor page. I have like a core set of longtime people I've helped like from a tax perspective, and that's all changing. But from like I don't take any new tax return clients. It's just too much. But you're with them for life, so you can only have so many people you care for. But what I can do is, as things continue to change, I do these little planning calls. So to help you with uh, anything personal, like I work only with individuals, and so I can give you some good, solid advice as you transition. Like if you just made a big sale, made a big year of income, ordinary capital, moving around from state to state. I've kind of seen and done this for like, I think it's 36 years now. If you want to know more about me, you can read my memoir series. And this is a hybrid book. I was trying to make like business principles fun, like telling it from my personal life story perspective. And this is the book I helped my husband with. Um, you can read, and he was one of my tax clients. So when people would ask, um, well, how did you two meet? I would always say love and taxes. That's that's how we met. So so you can read more about my technical skills in there, and then you can try out like a 15-30 minute call. I'm happy to give you some advice as you're trying to go through something maybe difficult or new. And I know there's going to be a lot of transition, obviously, coming up with our current administration of changes in personal lives, which would be great because it seems like people, I know how much people are paying in taxes. I have seen it over the years and how difficult things can be. Okay, back to the story. So we went from reading, right? Right. Okay, Girard read extensively, broadening his intellect and developing an assurance and self-confidence that would bring him to a command of his own ship at an early age. So his first voyage as a captain, he must have been a genius, came at the helm of a brigantine named Sally. At 23 years of age, Stephen Girard, a small man, only 5 foot 6 inches tall, but he was resolute as the captain of a seagoing vessel. His strong voice, so he had the voice, my husband has one of those voices, like he just speaks and like everyone in the room stops talking because it's so, resonant. Stephen's strong voice produced the authoritative ring necessary to hold the attention of a crew at sea for extended periods. His bright red hair accented his thorough demeanor, and he countenanced no nonsense on board his ship. So upon his return to Bordeaux in 1773, Girard was formally licensed as a captain in the French merchant marine by the French government. His reputation and skill as a sea captain obtained other potentially lucrative voyages for him, and he was soon carrying out sizable business deals that brought him extensive profits. On another voyage Girard took west was arriving in New York July of 1774, so 2 years before he becomes a Philadelphia lifelong resident. In short, he becomes acquainted with ship owners and merchants in the teeming city. A series of voyages down to New Orleans on vessels owned by Thomas Randall was someone who had befriended the energetic Girard. That led to a highly profitable business association between the two men. Girard began to develop an appreciation for the potential and the opportunities of the American market, buying sugar and coffee in the West Indies, meaning the Caribbean, to sell in the new nation, while returning shipping American goods to the West Indies, an arrangement that allowed him to quickly accumulate considerable capital. So again, he was taking advantage of a dramatic opportunity change of time and history and making the most of it instead of being afraid. Then comes the war. When America begins to flex its young muscles, in May of 1776, the blockade of the colonies took Girard off of his intended course to New York and steered him instead up the Delaware River in command of the Jeune Babe. I think that's how you say that. A schooner in which he had part ownership. So now he's like a ship owner. The diversion proved to be fortuitous because it brought him to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and yay, go Eagles. I've been a lifelong Eagles fan, and um I have a whole bunch of stories about the history of how the NFL was founded and how it came down out of coal country, and there's a reason why the Philadelphia fans are still considered so tough. We came from a very tough history, fearless history. So back to Girard. When he took up his permanent residence in Philly, his meteoric rises to riches began. On June 6th, 1776, so just a month shy of July 4th, the Declaration of Independence, Girard finds himself in the middle of a revolution. The colonies were debating whether or not to break from Britain, and Thomas Jefferson was putting those early touches on the Declaration of Independence. So if you think about it, I mean, they were at Independence Hall. So they were uh, right here, working away, having their meetings of Congress. So that was all happening in Philadelphia. George Washington was there. Robert Morris, who was Philadelphia big capitalist, was financing the revolution. Uh, different points, he banked his whole fortune as well. In the first weeks of Girard's residence in Philadelphia, turmoil became more insistent. The declaration's finalized, and he decides to throw his newly developed business influence, tenuous though it might have been in those first few months, and picks the Americans. As a Frenchman, he did not have great love for the Brits, and he saw an opportunity to help the fledgling nation in its bold determination to gain independence. Not in any combative way for him, but in the profitable business of supply. So he was going to, he knew shipping, right? This is very bold. He's 26, and so he just made a nice fortune already, and he's, picking to join the wild revolutionaries in Philadelphia. Ben Franklin's there, living there. Washington's living there. Jefferson's living down in Virginia, but is coming up there. Adams is the one up in Boston coming down to Philly. So, but they're like meeting there. The business environment that Girard developed so skillfully around him eventually helped determine that he could no longer go to sea as an active seafaring merchant. It was not only the management of his business enterprises that demanded his attention at home, but in 1776 he did marry an 18-year-old beauty, a Philadelphia native, Mary Lum. So that's a whole sad story. We won't go into that part of his story now. He bought a house in Mount Holly, New Jersey, which is over on the east side of the river, which I didn't know that till we're reading that. That from that place, he established a store selling sundry items to the locals, at the same time selling provisions to the American revolutionaries, which annoyed the British. Of course, Girard had embraced the American bit of liberty, but in so doing, also saw opportunity for profit. He continued his business dealings in Mount Holly as the war raged about him in New Jersey. As the British left the Mount Holly area, Girard and his wife moved back to Philly, which is like today would be like a 40-minute drive in traffic down a highway. It's not too far. and their business flourished for the next 2 years. While earning his profits as a Philadelphia merchant, Girard was also acquiring a fondness for the city itself and its stimulating environment. Girard the Frenchman was rapidly embracing the standards of his adopted American city society. It was acceptable practice for citizens at that time to acquire slaves, but he was not different in that regard, and he felt no stigma in owning slaves. But while he had slaves in his household, he did not carry slaves on any of his ships. So he was not bringing them over from Africa. Sorry, I have allergies. I have to keep my throat moist. Okay, so he becomes an American during the Revolutionary War. So I want to skip all this part about the mistresses. This is the next interesting thing is yellow fever. There's a couple books on this. Really hit Philadelphia hard. And again, you can read more about this him with ushistory.org. He becomes like the only one that stays in the city. All the other wealthy people leave and run away. And he stays and like sets up a hospital, works in the hospital himself, and ends up helping the city to clean up the water so it doesn't happen again. So he was definitely a roll up your sleeves, fix it kind of dude. Okay. So now it's a little later. This is the part I find interesting. Stephen Girard disagrees with George Washington. There was great unrest on the oceans of the world as the glow of victory over the dreaded yellow fever subsided for Girard, and 1793 comes to an end. His shipping enterprises were at risk because of all the marauding vessels, including British warships, French and Spanish privateers or pirates, seized many of his ships and confiscated his cargoes. And again, he was doing goods, wasn't doing slave trading. In the years between 1793 and 95, Girard initiated a movement to have the United States government be more heavily involved in protecting the shipping industry. There was war between France and Great Britain at that time, of course, because that's what they did all the time. And Girard was in sharp disagreement with President Washington's foreign policy on that issue. It was his contention that the United States should be more supportive of France, and him being a Frenchman, that makes sense. He reasoned that France had come to the aid of the young republic in its struggle to gain independence. It was then quite proper for the United States to reciprocate, he further would suggest. And he's talking, LaSalle was one that I think pledged his massive French fortune to help with the support the American Revolution. And so it was and that was a big connection to Philadelphia. There's LaSalle University still today in Philadelphia because of him. So, because that was Girard's reasoning that we should reciprocate what the French had done for us, the Americans. There was little of substance that came from his verbal confrontation with the Washington administration. A treaty was effected with the Brits, but gave little promise that the British would halt their aggressive actions against shipping. In fact, the compromise was known as the Jay Treaty, Jay for John Jay, Washington's envoy to Britain. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? It was so conciliatory to the British and satisfied very few. Girard being the most vocal in arguing it decidedly favored British concessions. I mean, they're stealing his stuff, right? They're putting him at risk, his business at risk. President Washington also saw the treaty as a victory in diplomatic circles for the Brits and a stinging setback for the young country. But the president reasoned that it was a necessity for this time. So, Washington, cynically, you could say, was selling out to the Brits who, they had just battled. Maybe he was tired from fighting. I don't, but he definitely was like not getting to the more pro-America situation. And we think about it, this is still what we're talking about right now with tariffs and making it equitable between the two, um, America and other countries. So this was happening then, and Girard was arguing for like protect America. What are we doing? We just fought this revolution. Despite the uncertainties of shipping worldwide, Girard's business enterprises continued to prosper. His wealth increased accordingly, but he remained a simple man. His only luxury was good food, fine wine, and his mistress. That all sounds familiar too. As he approached the middle years of his life, his wife had gone, he loved her, but she ended up having mental illness and ended up being kept in an insane asylum, and he, made sure she was kept in a good way, not like in a prison format, but he was very distraught by that, but he ended up having a girlfriend living with him. He shared his increasingly wealth willingly with those around him, considerable sums to charity, and this is where, okay, this is where I want to get to. Now we're coming up to 1812, so he's like still making a lot of money. He's running his business from Philadelphia. So he had been secretly selling arms to the revolutionaries in South America, Simon Bolivar in particular. Other South American countries were experiencing political upheaval. It was a time for bold and perhaps risky moves towards supplying those countries with not only the implements of war, but also, daily necessities. Girard was not one to shy away from risk if profit came from it. He did not plunge into unwarranted trouble sites, but weighed carefully his return. So, when he was going back and forth with the ships, he would be very strategic. And I think I don't know how many boats he had at this point. I know I read that before, but he's like running a big operation now. Girard tactfully petitioned the federal government, President Madison in particular, to approve his desire to supply those countries in South America, fighting to maintain their independence with arms and supplies. So now he's an arms dealer. He's like transporting arms to South America. I mean, this is the same stuff that's like still happening today. Girard got no approval from Madison, and in fact, he received no response at all from President Madison. Girard therefore drew the conclusion that he could not and should not supply the South American rebels with arms and ammunition. But the problems with Great Britain had not abated, and in fact, the War of 1812 was on the horizon. So now it's 1811. Girard is 61 years old now, and he was a multimillionaire and the richest man in America at that time. He conti His ability to continue to build his fortune was always at risk, however, because of all the piracy on the high seas that still persisted, threatening ships and cargoes. So that's a long time. Like that's basically his whole business career. Like the US, American young government did not help protect his ships at sea, his cargo, and he would lose them. So from the age of 23 to 61, he'd been, finding ways on his own to fight back and protect his business interest. And during the American Revolution. All right. He constantly reminded his government about what he felt was their responsibility to offer protection. Diplomatic and political efforts failed to resolve the hardening impasse between the Brits and America. Each took reprisals aimed at stifling trade between them, each banning one country's imports from the other. There was like trade wars going on. So here we go. Earlier in 1791, this is how he helped America stay alive during 1812. So backing up, so like 21 years earlier in 1791, Congress had sanctioned a national bank. Quote, the first bank of the United States was born and began operations later that year. The public was permitted to buy shares in the fledgling enterprise. Stephen Girard, ever on the prowl for newer ways to turn a profit, intuitive in his assessment of opportunity, invested heavily, and by 1811, he was the bank's largest shareholder. And this is in Philadelphia as well. I think this building's still standing. In 1812, the bank's charter was due for renewal, and there was a great debate on the merits of government and banking. Girard was one who saw benefit in government operating a bank, stability. The charter was not renewed, however, as Congress defeated the motion to renew. Oh, the bank's property was then put up for sale, and Girard, the opportunist, bought the bank and its assets, which I think as the largest shareholder, a lot of it would already have been his, and he reopened the first bank of the United States immediately. Thus, this highly successful shipping magnate and merchant of high repute and skill boldly stepped into another business venture at the age of 61. Maybe that's like maybe a little earlier, like 50s. Because if he's born in 50, yeah, 41. Thus, this far beyond This would bring him enormous profit, far beyond even his boldest estimates. He was farsighted and he was fearless. Becoming a banker was only another conquest for this shrewd, hardworking man. Girard became a banker almost overnight, and in the process, he became America's most powerful banker. So he named his bank simply Girard's Bank. It was not done to vent his ego. Rather, it exemplified his simple, straightforward personality. There was no need for grandeur and pomposity. Girard's bank would figure prominently in the future of his adopted nation in short order. And this is where it gets good. It gets a little sip here. I always love how these solo, brave, fearless people, a lot of times their stories are suppressed by like the system, the bureaucracy, the administration, because they really don't want to believe or condone that like one soul like flipped a hinge in history. Okay, on June 18th, 1812, after exhaustive and repeated attempts to solve the differences between America and Great Britain that had festered over the years, President Madison signed an official declaration of war against the nation the United States had defeated only 3 decades earlier in the Revolutionary War, Great Britain. There was determination in the declaration of war, but there was also great risk. America was hardly capable of conducting the war with any superiority in numbers or equipment. As a fledgling nation, only beginning to gather itself as independent, America was hardly in a position to conduct a war. It would need resources and money. And of course, Congress had just given away their own the government's bank, sold it off for parts. On the opposite side, the British were in a far better position to conduct a successful war. After many attempts to shore up the finances of the Treasury Department, all of them failing, it became obvious to all government officials and Stephen Girard that the United States was going to lose the war with the Brits unless a large infusion of cash was made into the U.S. Treasury. So, in early 1813, the fears became a fact. The feds had run out of money. Stephen Girard was the only one with the necessary cash to make the Treasury solvent once more. John Jacob Astor, and that's a famous name, and a few other lesser financiers had committed to a part of the sum needed to help, but their commitment fell far short of the sum needed to finance the war. So again, this is US history. It's now I'm on part three. This is the way he bailed out America in 1812 so we could be an American today. A loan to the Treasury in excess of $8 million. Without demanding the concessions from the government, let's see, I can't know if I can read this well. Without demanding the concessions from the government, concessions he could readily have obtained, Girard displayed the courage and patriotism that few others could or would. He risked his entire fortune in granting a loan to the Treasury in excess of $8 million. When his country was down and out, Girard came to the rescue. I wouldn't have trusted him like that because they'd already bankrupted Robert Morris and put him in debtor's prison for pledging his fortune for the American Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Ghent officially ended the war in December of 1814. America once more retreated to peace that was obtained largely because of one man. Girard displayed the confidence in his nation that others lacked. Bold and fearless, wise and with indomitable spirit, Girard gave America a lesson in courage and love of country that should have been recorded by historians with greater understanding and more prolific publication, in my opinion. Certainly with more profound passion and eloquence. So if you go like look at his page today, all they talk about is that he kept that he was a racist. Is like how they've dumbed him down and just made it about like a one issue thing. So I really hope that he gets um a better, more full character about what this man did that we're here today even talking about this. September 13th, 1815 should have been a date of no special import for Stephen Girard. There was no new shipping disasters. There was nothing to interfere with the new and successful banking career of Stephen Girard. It did, however, this is the day he lost his wife and she died. He was distraught. And that was like he couldn't work. Girard's business strength never faltered, however, in the face of this adversity. His banking successes multiplied, and his reputation in the banking industry soon became legendary. He was frequently courted for advice and support on banking matters. And the Second Bank of the United States came about largely because of his influence. This bank was located in Philadelphia, so as to be in concert with his bank, Girard's Bank, also located in the city. Girard's wealth and personal appeal were a positive factor, as well as the financial stability that accrued in doing business with Girard's Bank. Despite his wealth, which entitled Girard to a life of luxury and ease should he desire. He was a hands-on businessman. From shipping, farming, and then into banking, he was visible in all areas of his workplace, often performing menial, physically demanding tasks in defiance of his advancing years. My deeds must be my life, and when I am dead, my actions must speak for me. My deeds must be my life, and when I am dead, my actions must speak for me. He further said that when death came for him, he would be busy unless he was asleep in bed. And those words truly represented this simple living, but philosophically complex man. So I just want to kind of get into the whole banking thing. There's a lot more about his life we can cover in another video, but I wanted to get him on record and give him um, more, you know, cred and respect for saving America at a time when no one else would or could step up in the same way. This, I just want to show you, there's a real historian here.
Good afternoon. I'm Raleigh Flynn, and I'm the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia. And I'd like to thank you today for joining us for the fourth and
Okay. I didn't want to go into having her video pop, but that is a place where there's a 2 hour thing on YouTube that you could listen to a real historian go into the Stephen Girard story in a deeper, better way. But I wanted to give credence and respect to a real patriot. And then I think today in our times, we're like repeating some of those same things again and like trying to get equity for America in trade is what he was all about. And he risked his whole fortune. I'm thinking another episode on him I want to really get into his uh, will, how his will kind of shaped American estate laws as principles. He basically cut out his like nieces and nephews and people he didn't know and gave it all to the city of Philadelphia primarily. Uh, so th and there's still trusts that are paying out. We'll get into that. And what do they actually own? It's kind of interesting. So um, I think there's a lot more still hidden there invisibly, but we'll do that in another episode after I read up a little bit on him. So hope everyone has a great day. Namaste.